Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our last session for these intelligence briefing modules for the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive. Thanks for being here and supporting what we're doing. Before I get to the end, I just wanted to thank all of you guys who are here and everyone online for supporting the project. And also, in particular, I want to thank our mostly volunteer staff. First of all, my wife, Emily, without whom there would be no Disclosure Project, and never have had this project. Over the years of 34 years, she's probably done 95% of all administrative and organizational things behind the scenes, and she's the unsung heroine of this, and she's just a wonderful person. We're about to have our 45th anniversary. And Pat Pearsall, who you all know from the membership, who's running the back end of the webinar, Justice Campbell, and we have Marcel and Lara and Raven, and who else has been working on this? I mean, that's our team here. And they just do this out of the goodness of their heart as volunteers, and this whole project has run that way for a very, very long time. And I want to thank them, because without these fine people, let's just give them applause. Thank you, guys. Much love and much gratitude. Thank you. Now, this topic is tonight's final, this is the last in my mind, although it's not necessarily many people's minds related to disclosure, but it really is. It's called The Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. That's what we'll be going through today. And as an introduction, many people don't know that there are 5 categories of close encounters. That nomenclature I think began in the 60s with Project Blue Book and Dr. Jalen Hynek. I'm not 100% sure of that, I'm pretty sure. And traditionally, there were the 3 that you know about. Close encounters of the first kind was seeing a craft within a close enough range to see its superstructure and details. A close encounter of the second kind is when there's physical evidence, trace, radar, landing trace, etc. left. A close encounter of the third kind that you all know from the Steven Spielberg movie is when you have a meeting encounter with an extraterrestrial biological entity. And even close encounter of the fourth kind is when you have an experience on board the craft. And then a close encounter of the fifth kind is when humans initiate the contact or cooperate it with intention, meaning it's the first category out of the 5 that are not actuated by people. In other words, we initiate contact. So that concept was born out of the 1973 experience I had, which we've already discussed. And that concept was a paradigm shift, because instead of passively having something happen or passively seeing something, it was an attempt to actually engage the ETVs, extraterrestrial vehicle, spell that out once. It's an ETV, and the EVANs, the extraterrestrial biological entities, and invite them to interact with you, as opposed to something that happens, inadvertently or passively. So that is a big difference, because instead of passively seeing something go by, you end up engaging it. So there can be, I had Dr. Richard Haynes wrote a book called CE5 back in the 90s. And it was cases I'd collected and some he had in his files of incidental ones. In other words, somebody would be somewhere, would see one of these ET craft, and would signal to it, and it'd come over and signal back. And then there are the cases where people would see it and think to it and say, well, would it move just accidentally, just quietly by themselves? Well, I wish I could see it better, move to the right, and it moves to the right. Or I wish it comes closer. And this has been reported for decades, but you have to find the cases where that's embedded in the report, right? So that book, which I don't know if it's in print anymore, by Dr. Richard Haynes, sort of put a bunch of those together. Some of my early papers did as well, that will be in the archive. So some of these early let's call them inadvertent CE5 cases, where there is a passive event happen, but the person engages it instead of running scared or freaking out or just ignoring it. And so, we collected various types of CE5, close encounters of fifth kind cases, that demonstrated that. And what I determined is that there were three major modalities that would cause a CE5 to happen. People would, if you see an object, then they would signal with a headlight or a light, and it would signal back and then interact that way. And then there were others that involved speech or sound, and it would react to the sound and replicate it and send it back. And of course, the one that's the most confusing to left-brained Western scientists and people is the ones that are actuated by consciousness and thought. But that's also the most effective way. And that can happen with a planned contact event or just accidentally when something's seen and you think to it. So once we documented that, then we formalized the protocols. So the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind protocols, which you can see in the CE5 contact app for your phone, and everyone should have that and download it. That's a whole training program. It goes all the way through remote viewing, meditation, how to set up your team. It has everything in there. Most people have never perused it to see what's in there. It's an enormous amount of content in that app. It's really an entire training manual for your mobile phone. So we decided to formalize that. So when we do our CE5 protocols, we start the process by playing some electromagnetic tones that were picked up in the center of a crop circle when Colin Andrews and some researchers were in England, and the BBC was there with some big Betacam cameras, and I think it's the late 80s, maybe in early 90s. And there were these strange electromagnetic anomalies, and so much so that it was a tone that was picked up by the camera, but it was a strange frequency, and it sort of burned out a lot of the camera components or affected them. And this is a well-documented case, but we got a recording of that, and then Colin Andrews was a sound engineer, so he took the original, sounds like a, and then slowed it down so you could hear the components, boop, 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 almost sounds like a heartbeat or ultrasound. Now, then we had some engineers take it and clean it up. So it's the same pattern, but without any interference. And that's the one in the app that we have. It's the one that we modified and made more accurate and took out some of the extraneous sounds. So that is what we use, and we set up a protocol where we play it, and we'll just use a radio frequency walkie-talkie or something and transmit it out. So we realized that initially we weren't doing that, but in the early 90s, I think it was 1992, we were in Alton Barnes, Wiltshire, in that area, and we went up on a hill, and it was sort of a strange, foggy, drizzly night. Well, not strange for England, we had a small team out that night, and we decided, well, what will happen if we just play these and then take a little walkie and transmit it? And we did that, and then suddenly all around us in a sort of a strange stereo, almost like a echoic chamber in all directions, it came back slightly modified, and you could hear it in the air, and it was actually started beeping through the transmitter. Overtook we weren't, it wasn't on receive mode, it overtook the transmit mode, and it came through. And we went, wow, they're picking this up. And then we had a contact event happen. So we realized that was something we should add, do with the protocol. Initially, in the old days, for lights to send out to let them know where we are, we were using these big tracker lights, like when you're hunting. Then we graduated to lasers, and now we use pretty high-powered lasers that go up, straight up. so that they get a specific vector where we are. So the sound and the laser, if they're looking for you and you've already mentally initiated contact, will show them precisely where you are. And the reason for that is I found that many people are not that accurate with their mental guidance and visualization to show them exactly where they are. And so this is a way of using both the consciousness assisted technologies and using thought to show them where you are, but and then augmenting it occasionally with a laser and some tone. So in case people's minds are a little fuzzy or inaccurate, they know precisely where you are. So that was those are the basic techniques we're using. There's a great deal that we won't have time to go into, obviously, in terms of learning the protocols and practicing it. The foundation of it, and the most important, is the science of consciousness by far. Because as I've mentioned already, if you look at the research done by Dr. John at Princeton and other scientists with random number generators, where people will just think to a random number generator, just sort of a little quantum computer in a sense, and you intend it to generate more ones and zeros, it will shift and it'll start spitting out more ones than zero, much more so than just a probability or error. And it's very consistent. And then they did studies and they found that if two people loved each other or were united and coherent, it went up exponentially, the results. And so there was a lot of research that had been done over the years, as well as the projects with the CIA dealing with remote viewing. We reviewed that earlier with Ingo Swann and others. And so while most people would brush this off as nonsense, certainly in highly classified projects, they know this is the Rosetta Stone of contact. And that's what happened when we had that event in 1992 on the beach near Pensacola, when this broke into the media. And we just started this as one of the early group training events for just a weekend. It was just a Friday night, Saturday, Sunday. The intelligence community knew that we had cracked that code, because that really is the Rosetta Stone. It is understanding that consciousness is a field, it's field consciousness, and that it's actually omnipresent, and you can train yourself to use your own awareness in a meditative state to remotely see, but then take a passive remote viewing approach and flip it around to an active vectoring. A vector meaning, like, if you're going to guide an aircraft, a jet landing at LaGuardia, they're vector you in, they're show and all that, so you can guide it in. In this case, it's using consciousness and a sequence of thought. So the practice involves first the meditative state and reaching a state of calmness and the ability to connect to your own consciousness in its pure form, what some people call samadhi, or a deep or quiet state of consciousness. And then very subtly intend to see where these ET craft are. So it's using scanning. So you can scan the area, you can scan space, and you can just feel and intuit. So this is where the intuitive component of the conscious component and then the heart component, where you can feel, come together. And this is very powerful, the resonance between heart and mind. They've done studies, the Heart Math Institute and others, you can look these up. And it really potentiates the remote viewing and contact protocols if you connect also with intention in your heart. Now, the reason for that is pretty clear, that the ETs are, those civilizations are so advanced, all their communication systems involve the science of consciousness, non-locality, entanglement, etc. And it's very scientific, although most people, it's like woo-woo, right? Sort of, like a seance or something. It's not that. But so when you start thinking about it, it makes sense, as we've explained. If you're a civilization that's 10 to the 6th to 10 to the 9th years more advanced than we are, 100,000 to a billion or so years more advanced, they're not going to be using 1844 telegraph, electromagnetic, which is really what we're using. I mean, let's not fool ourselves. Everything we're using for communication is from the mid-1800s. It's electromagnetic frequencies, radio frequencies, cell phones use it, the internet uses it, TV, radio, all of it. It's different applications and it's become more and more sophisticated, but it's still using electromagnetic frequencies at the speed of light. And as we've discussed previously, the speed of light is just too slow to have any effective interstellar communication. You cannot use the speed of light. And so it would be natural for civilizations that had reached that point of technology and were looking out to travel would at the same time begin to develop technologies that were involve this quantum entanglement, this field consciousness, but interfacing at a quantum entangled level with devices. That would look similar to like a communication device, except it can receive and send quanta of thought through the non-local entangled field of consciousness. Now, what does that mean? Well, you can go back to ancient teachings in many, many societies. The best description is Vedanta and the Vedas, of all the ones I read on Earth, where it describes the consciousness as a field that is omnipresent and boundless, a sort of a boundless field of awareness that is the root basis for each individual consciousness. So most people view I'm me, my individuality and yours were awake, and therefore it's my consciousness, which is true to a point. But when you have these experiences where you go deep into consciousness and you increasingly experience the ability to see remote places, affect remote places, and work on that level, you realize that, in fact, the field consciousness that allows people to be awake is actually infinite. It's not bound. So it's unbounded in space and time. So this is your most quantum entangled field is field consciousness. And that's where there's this whole science of consciousness that's been emerging and studies done. And from a practical point of view, what it means that if you can calm your mind in a meditative state, which we teach, and there are various approaches to this, you can have an experience where you begin to get a glimpse or experience this deep, quiet ocean, unbounded ocean of mind that is the root source of your own individual consciousness. And that's all it is. So as you experience that, then you can actually subtly intend without straining too hard to see a remote place or effect a remote place. And this is where if you look at Dr. Larry Dossey's work on, he has a book called Recovering the Soul, where it talks about intercessionary prayer and remote healing and all kinds of effects. It's the same concept. And the reason that works is because if someone's in that state of consciousness and with a pure intent, they can affect remote locations and events and what have you, including a disease state. So there have been a lot of studies that document this from a left brain linear scientific point of view. It's very abstract and doesn't seem like it's actually a science, but it absolutely is a science. And so the science of the next 1,000 years, after we catch up with the lost century of 100 years of suppressed technology, will be the science of consciousness. That is the final frontier, not space. The exploration and the development of consciousness is the ultimate frontier, not space-time as it's thought of. So when you begin to look at that, you think, well, this means that once we get over this basic disclosure issue and the fundamental physical sciences of energy generation, propulsion, medical systems, et cetera, and so forth, are out and they're used peacefully and stable, then there will be a big focus on the development of the science of consciousness in all its applications. Right now, that's not being looked at except in extremely classified projects, which are light years ahead of anything going on at any university or any company, because they were able to study extraterrestrial communication systems and realize that's how they work. This is why when I first emerged doing this, and we were detected by the intelligence community training people to make contact, and it worked, and there were results, this was viewed as a real threat to their hegemony and control of the subject. Because the ultimate disclosure is for millions and millions of people to learn these basic techniques, make contact, and contact happens. And at that point, how do you control that, right? You control through suppressive measures, which we'll talk about in a moment. But it still can't completely get rid of it. And that's why they were very concerned about it, and why initially I was threatened and then tried to be bribed and all that kind of stuff in 1992. But ultimately, the power of this has to do in part with the fact that when a group of people do it, it's not additive, it's exponential. So 1 and 1 is not 2, it's 10. And the reason for that, the studies that have been done in the science of consciousness, there is an exponential effect when more than one person is in that coherent conscious field. And if there's enough people in that field, it has a huge effect. So back in the days when I was becoming a meditation teacher in the 1974 period, there have been studies a couple years before by Herbert and Benson at Harvard and a few other places studying the meditative state and finding that, well, it lowered blood pressure, caused coherence in the brain waves across the corpus callosum, which is the dividing between left and right hemisphere. And there were all these studies that came out. But they also found that when there was a certain number of people, and it came to about 1% of a population in, say, a community. Let's say you live in a town of 200,000 people, 2,000 people, 1%, around that were in a consistent meditative state, doing it properly. I mean, not just, crazy stuff, but I mean, really seriously meditating, that it shifted the field consciousness in that whole area, and they've had a lowering of crime, emergency room visits went down, violence went down, all kinds of things that were measured. And this eventually got called and dubbed the Maharishi effect. But in reality, it's collective consciousness coherence that can affect the other 99% of people. So what they found is that when you are in that state, and there's a certain critical mass, let's call it, of people, around 1%, that it has this field effect, even on people who don't even know you're there doing it, right? Because no one would know that there were those 1% of people in that community doing it, and yet spontaneously there was coherence, peace, and orderliness that built in the community. This is why I keep saying, if we had 1% of the human population, which is 8 billion now, so that'd be 80 million people doing it, you'd have an entire transformation take place, and the other 99% probably wouldn't realize why they were becoming happier and more coherent and less violent. And that's true. So now we don't have 80 million people doing that, but we could, right? I mean, it's just about, communications and get the message out. So if you look at the documentary that's linked in the archive, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, that came out in 2020. And of course, it went viral and hundreds of millions of people saw it. And it caused a lot of people to realize, oh, this works. And so people started doing it. William Shatner and Demi Lovato, and they started posting it. So it sort of took on a life of its own at that point, which was the purpose of doing the documentary. And as you all know, all of our documentary films are crowdfunded. People donate to the crowdfunding of it, and we produce it. So there's nobody in the corporate or Hollywood world that can take things out. We have complete editorial control over content. This is the only way I'll do a project, by the way. I don't care if you offer me $100 million and if you want final edit, go do it with somebody else. Okay. So sorry, but I know how corrupted these projects become. But when you look at this field effect in consciousness or field consciousness, it then explains why when you have a small group that's coherent, I'm not talking about thousands of people, on a CE5 contact team, and they're coherent, and they're in a deep meditative state, it is much more effective than if you do it by yourself, interestingly. The old saying, God loves those who work together. There was a reason for that, because when one conscious person and another and another and another go into a deep meditative state with a pure intent, a clear intent, it has an extraordinary effect that's where the whole is much greater than the sum of the parts, exponentially so, in fact. And so it's a very powerful understanding of what's called the quantum entanglement or non-locality, but applied to the conscious field. Most people don't realize that by virtue of being awake, you are in fact beyond space and time. And a lot of people don't realize that. So even though your individuality and ego may trap your consciousness, where you're only aware of your immediate environment, what you're seeing, what you're thinking, it's all self-centered. The field consciousness that allows you to be awake is actually all the time omnipresent. So this is how a lot of mysterious things are not so mysterious once you understand the quantum physics of consciousness. And so you can have these remote effective events. Before the night before, the morning of 9/11, they had a program where they had random number generators all over the world in a project, and we refer to this in our archive. And there was a huge spike in all those precognitively right before 9/11. It's almost like a disturbance in the field, the force, right? I hate to sound like Yoda or something, but this is exactly what it is. And so it can pick that up. And so even a mechanical system that is tuned to that kind of quantum event can be affected and measured, and has been. Now, unfortunately, you don't learn this at MIT or in high school or college or anywhere else, but it is essential for anyone involved with NASA, space, and UAP research to know this, because you're not dealing with your grandfather's Ma Bell telephone or iPhone or whatever it is. You're dealing with a whole different type of paradigm for not only contact and communication, but travel and all kinds of other phenomena, correct myself, that are associated with this coherent conscious field effect. Now, interestingly, when you end up having an experience with this and you're meditating deeply, many people will have something appear in front of them, but it can be something in the sky, it can be something in your room, right? So it can get into some very, what Dr. Jan Heine called high strangeness phenomenon. But that's how you would expect it. I mean, if it's interstellar civilization, there's no reason for them to appear as the, full of brush salesman knocking on your door or whatever. So it's a very, has a whole new science. It's a whole field of science that we don't have time to go into, but it's very important to understand that's the foundation of that. So one thing that will help people is to think of yourself right now, you're hearing this voice, mine, but take away, subtract, is sort of a Zen technique. Take away everything you're hearing, everything you're thinking, everything you're feeling, your own physical body sensation, your own thoughts, and your own sense of your own self, and just become quiet for a moment and see that you are awake. The awakeness, the bit, not what you're aware of. This is almost no one in that I know in the even in the science of consciousness field understand this extremely important point. It's not what you're aware of. It's not linear. It's the what I call awakeness itself, right? Consciousness itself. And when you experience it in its universal form, which is folded within each person, but we usually cut it off by ego and individual, but both can exist. So when you practice meditation enough, you can begin to have these experiences called samadhi or what have you, where you're in a very deep state and you're conscious and you realize that you're just boundless. You're not limited space time. You're in a sort of omnipresent sort of capability, that when you get into individual awareness again, you can stay connected to that field that is beyond space-time and then operate as an individual. So you can remote view, you can remotely heal, you can engage in other things that have broadly been called the siddhis, S-I-D-D-H-I-S, in the ancient Vedic literature, that involve things such as levitation, teleportation, dematerialization, manifestation, all this sort of thing. And we have an entire 4-hour workshop on our YouTube channel about that. And we obviously don't have time to go into it. But this science of consciousness, what's important is that it's the root of the CE5 contact initiative. But step one is actually to master your own mind and consciousness. And this is where, when you look at the early quantum physicists, you know, that said the total number of minds in the universe is one, that it's a singularity. So the singularity everyone's really looking for in AI is not what they think. It's actually this consciousness field awareness. And so that is, in fact, the point of unity, right? And it transcends space-time, and yet is it in its fullness at every point in space and time. In other words, it's not a divisible reality. Now, our own individuality trap our consciousness in our own selves. And so we think it's my consciousness and yours and yours. That's not true. We have our own individuality, but the light, let's call it the clear light of being awake, is a singularity. It's an omnipresent field. And we're just, it's coming through us, but we're always connected to it. So all interstellar civilizations have to understand this, because otherwise they couldn't even have their communication systems operative, never mind many of their other scientific systems. So this will eventually become the big science of the next 1,000 years or so, as we move from the material sciences and zero-point energy and what have you. And the foundation of universal peace really is what we're talking about here. How do you create a civilization that is together in a state of peace and unity, rather than disunity and violence? This is why I said earlier, this is a spiritual crisis, not really religious, because religions divide people, but a deep spiritual crisis where we acknowledge everyone's difference, but we haven't figured out what the point of unity is. Now, people would say intellectually, well, through humanism, that point of unity is our humanity, humanism. We're all human, right? That won't cut it. That would have worked 100 years ago. But now we're dealing with non-human intelligence. So what is the basis for our having a peaceful relationship with those civilizations? They're not human, never mind our own racist proclivities and our nationalistic and divisive proclivities. How are you going to, even if the whole world became unified around humanism and our common humanity, but if we are not in touch with this aspect of our own conscious individual selves, and realize that when you look through the eyes of an ET or a human, and you can feel the light of consciousness, that conscious field is identical within any civilization in creation as it is with us. It's the same unified field of consciousness. That is the foundation for not only world peace, but universal peace. So this is why our motto for that project is one universe, one people. But the foundation of that unity is the understanding of what this singularity of consciousness is, and experiencing it. And you can experience it whether you're a Buddhist, a Catholic, a Muslim, a Baha'i, a Zoroastrian, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter, right? Because those are all external divisions socially and organizationally. Has nothing to do with the essential spiritual state or deep consciousness, let's call it, state of every single human, but also every single extraterrestrial intelligent life form. So this is where I like to refer to this as sentientness, that you're awake and you're sentient. Well, that is actually universal. Okay. So we're awake and perceiving. A being that's non-human from another star system is also conscious. And in neuroscience, the old classical theory, which prevails to this day or dominates to this day, is that the brain and matter create consciousness. But there are plenty of studies and plenty of experiences people have that show it's the other way around. That in fact, that the consciousness creates the physical body and everything else. It's the other way around, which explains a lot of unusual phenomena, such as remote healing. Now, when you begin to look at this, you say, well, if that could be scientifically replicated as an operating system, let's say, in society, the science of consciousness would be the premier science that would then link all others and would also empower others, because at that point you can then see how the consciousness field and the subtle, let's call it the more subtle fields of consciousness, as you go from the absolute field of pure undifferentiated consciousness into finer and finer manifestation or what have you, that it creates and takes with it that singularity. So this is why they have found, for example, in the 80s, it was published in physics journals, and it was even the mainstream media, I think in Time and Newsweek back then, that there were some scientists that were working on, firing photons down a tube. And they found that when they just thought of changing where it was going to go, before they did so, the photon changed directions. Now look these studies up in physics, and it happened over and over and over again. And of course, people were mystified. There was no devices, there was no electronics, there was no explanation for this, except everything is in fact consciousness, and the consciousness field at a different frequency making a photon or a star or your body or that tree out there. You see? So once you understand this, and actually not only understand it, begin to experience it, and this is the state of unity consciousness people think of, you realize that there are extraordinary applications to this if it's done for good and peaceful purposes. Now, it can also be used for not so nice ones. We went over that the other day in terms of radionic, psychotronic, and other kind of warfare systems. But it also lays the foundation for an extraordinary leap forward. And this is where you really begin to become an advanced civilization and technology. And believe it or not, even though this sounds like something from ancient times, it is the foundation of not only world unity and universal peace and unity, but of the most important sciences that will evolve, that cannot evolve without that understanding, that are way beyond just, energy and propulsion systems or what have you. So this is why this whole concept of the science of consciousness is so central to what we're ultimately trying to achieve. And it's very relevant to disclosure, because we have, in the disclosure project really was a result of a successful CE5 contact event, as I mentioned earlier, in Florida in 1992. And when that was because it was very well understood by people read into those programs that this really was the Rosetta Stone. This was the secret sauce of not only contact, but of interstellar communications, and the foundation for their social organization. So for a minute, let's talk about that. We're a very divided and warfaring tribal people still. If you doubt it, go anywhere in the world and look. Or come to, if I was still in the ER on Saturday night. It's a Saturday night. Saturday night's all right for fighting. Anyway, and this conundrum of how do you go beyond ethnic, religious, racial, nationalistic, so like a boundless numbers of things that people can divide and fight over, all right? So the only way to transcend that is evolution in consciousness. But were you not what you're conscious of? People think, oh, it's the peace movement. You're aware of peace, or women's studies, or women's consciousness. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about field consciousness, the root of all awareness. And by acknowledging that you're awake, you're also acknowledging that you're universal, and that the universality of the deep level of consciousness that allows you to be conscious, even if you don't have any experience with this infinite field, that is really what people can experience through the meditative state, which is why the meditative state is so important in ancient societies, and it's very important now, although it's neglected. And from a personal, just side note here, I'm quite convinced that I would never have been able to understand any of this if I hadn't died. Now, I'm not saying you have to drop dead and have a near-death experience to develop this, but in my case, having come from the background I did, I probably never would have. I would have gone into conventional science and medicine, had no awareness of this. But because of that direct experience of that unity state of consciousness, I mean, full on, I realized, this is the secret. And I also, when I had the contact experience 6 months later, in October 1973, it all made sense. All of it made sense, and always has ever since 1973 for us and the people I work with. But that CE5 contact program not only led to disclosure, but it's also going to be the best outcome of disclosure. And what do I mean by this? Once we've been able to get these terrible dysfunctions corrected in our society and injustices, imagine 100 years after we have 0-point energy, we have electrogravitics, we have technologies that can literally materialize things, objects. You can have transmutation of elements, as it were, as we talked about the Santilli generator, plasma generator. And so in over a couple, 3, 4, 5 generations, if we're peaceful and don't blow ourselves up, there'll be no poverty, there'll be no scarcity, there'll be infinite amount of abundance, because you don't have to dig anything up. It'll just be assembled from the subspace of energy. Everyone then is going to turn, if we're peaceful, to an increasing pursuit of developing higher states of consciousness. And these higher states of consciousness, just very quickly, go from the acknowledgement, knowledge of the conscious field and this aspect of our awareness. The fact that we're all awake proves that we know what that is. You don't have to go anywhere or study anything. You know that you're conscious right now and listening to my voice. But once you realize that everyone in this room, while distinct individuals and no two are alike, they're like snowflakes, and even identical twins are not identical. And but they're all awake, and we're all awake by the same conscious field, the singularity of consciousness. Once that is known in knowledge, intellectually, and then you practice meditation, you experience it, then people realize that this is really the great pursuit, because then you can go from just understanding it and being in the meditative state to beginning to evolve to where you're so familiar with that deep, quiet consciousness state that you have something evolved that's been called cosmic consciousness. That sounds very flowery, but what it really means is that you're experiencing out of the meditative state, your eyes are open, you're driving down the road, and you're simultaneously aware of this space-time, but you're also connected to and aware of this infinite field, not just intellectually, but experientially, right? So then you can be driving down the road and can have over the horizon radar, because you can sense where the police are with a radar detector and that kind of thing. And it's true. So you begin to have that evolve to where it's permanent. And when it's permanently established that you experience while you're awake and doing things, this deep state of infinite consciousness, when it's stabilized, when it isn't something that just comes and goes, it's called cosmic consciousness. Eventually, this will evolve to even higher states of consciousness, where you are beginning to be able to see through the refinement of your own neuroanatomy and conscious field, subtle energy. So you can see into other dimensions. You can see the celestial. You could see energies that normally aren't seen. And you hear of this with little children or certain enlightened people who've had that experience, but that will become routine in society when everyone begins to pivot that way. When it reaches a certain level, then reach a point, and it's been termed God consciousness, which of course is controversial because a lot of people in our society don't believe in God per se, because it's a charged, loaded word. But let's say you're aware of this infinite field and consciousness in its most refined forms. Yeah, in other words, as the undifferentiated field of absolute consciousness, that's this pure consciousness, evolve, you begin to perceive the first. No? Oh, someone's in there. They didn't turn it off. So at that point, you begin to see dimensions, worlds, subtle all the way at will. It's an at-will state. And then there's another level where eventually, and this is called unity consciousness, where you simultaneously are experiencing consciousness in its infinite form while you're up and about, but externally you're actually perceiving. This is very abstract, but it's an extraordinary experience where you actually experience and perceive that everything in the so-called objective external world is consciousness phasing and resonating at a certain frequency. So you actually can see that chandelier as consciousness itself phasing, but you can actually feel it and experience it. And then there are other states higher than that, but it's beyond the scope of this presentation. Now, why is that significant? Because when you reach that point, it's like what the Buddha said, you see all people, all beings as yourself, and literally experience it. So the heart of compassion is that if you were to injure another person, you realize you're injuring yourself. You're actually experiencing at that level, the profound oneness level. And under those conditions, even the thought of doing violence and harm is itself injurious and painful to the person. So as society evolves, I'm just trying to give you a glimpse of the next several 100,000 years, civilizations move from fractured, divisive, to peaceful, geopolitical peace, universal peace. We're not fighting out in space either, but into what some people would call the peace of the Great Enlightenment, where people are enlightened. And the civilizations that are in charge of at the highest level of what's happening with planet Earth are operating from that level. And those would be the most senior members of, say, an interstellar council or coalition. And in our country and in the world, you're an ambassador to France if you gave a lot of money to the political party that just won. But in that paradigm and in interstellar civilization, it's based on your state of consciousness. So the highest level ambassadors are the ones who are in the highest state of permanent consciousness that have attained these levels. It's very important for people to understand. Now, the CE5 contact program, therefore, is really a preparatory to have established after disclosure. Because what happens after disclosure of all this and the establishment? Well, if the disclosure results in the proliferation of technologies that are handled by people still in the consciousness of divisiveness and war, instead of deep, genuine spiritual peace, it's the end of the world again, because they're going to be deployed as weapon systems. So when I say that the crisis humanity is facing is at its root a spiritual or deep consciousness crisis, this is what we're referring to. And therefore, the CE5 contact program or concepts are really not only foundational to disclosure and guiding what we're doing, but also important to get out ahead of the curve, as it were, of disclosure. So many people question, why are you doing this instead of that? Or stop doing CE5 contact and just do disclosure, or forget about disclosure and just do the CE5 work. No, it doesn't work that way. They're one part and parcel of the same effort, and they complement each other. So I just want to give those introductory remarks for a little bit before we go into this is what it looks like. It's the, the cover for the poster art for the documentary. And you'll see, in here we have the top priority. These are just the books that we have that are focused on close encounters of the fifth kind. There are CE5 field reports that go back to the early 90s in here. There are the training expeditions we've done where amazing experiences and videos and what have you have happened. And then there are the documentaries and other videos. And there are many, many, many videos in here that are not full-on productions. So we're populating this category with that information from my archive all the way back to 1990. So if you want to turn on here the first category or subcategory, I should say, you'll see that we have these were the early days. We called it a rapid mobilization investigating, RMIT. We're not using that term anymore, but when there would be some major event happen, there would be a small group of us that would go to Mexico when there was a big report of a bunch of these objects being seen or wherever, and it was a rapid response. As soon as we could, we'd go. And there were some extraordinary reports, and those full reports are in here. Obviously, we're not going to go through them and they were, from various places. And here we just put a few. Here's one from Monterrey, Mexico. Here's Southern England, another one in Mexico, et cetera, and so on. So when you look at that, I'm going to read them now. Those are very important because they're foundational. They're the foundation of those early experiences and what happened and how it informed everything we've done since. So when you want to do, is this the website or the? Oh, it's the other. So you'll see this. There was the date. This is 1992. That report from that expedition in southern England in Wiltshire, and of course you can read that. Everybody knows. Most people know about what happened, where we were there in about 100-foot diameter extraterrestrial disc-shaped craft came in and hovered above the field, and all of that that took place at the farm in near Woodborough Hill in Wiltshire. And those early experiences ended up also getting pushed over to the Ministry of Defense. And there was someone in the UFO office at the Ministry of Defense who wanted to meet after this happened and get that information and kick it up through channels at MOD because it was such a significant event. And it was noted by other people who were there, and they realized that just like earlier that year in Florida, 92, the U.S. Intelligence Committee made note once we made contact. So a similar event happened where the Ministry of Defense said, oh, what is this group doing? And I went in and provided a briefing for a man at the time named Nick Pope, who was there in the MOD, and he was working in that office. And so I flew over in the following spring to brief him and some of the other people who were there. So this history goes back a very, very long time. And I always put this in here to give you a sense that there's an institutional memory and documentation of the evolution of that project now for 30-some years. One of the things that happened, just going back to there, that was amazing in terms of realizing how the ETs operate, which I think is important for people to understand operationally. There was a whole lot of people who were trying to chase me around the countryside. There, NHK, a TV out of Japan, and the BBC. There were a bunch of reporters in German, and so it was difficult to get some privacy to do a nighttime field operation like that. And interestingly, one night when this happened, the main event happened, we were trying to, we were on this farm. It's an 1,800-acre farm there at Woodborough Hill. It's Royal Trust land, but the film manager really loved what we were doing and gave us permission to use that. So we went in there, but there are still people who could come right into the edge. And Woodborough Hill, if you've ever been to England, there are these paths that go over private land, but they are ancient and people have the right of way to go. It's not like this country. It's very different. And, we were being invaded by various, disruptive folks. And so we're there and this strange rainstorm came in. So what actually happened, we were doing the CE5 meditation and protocols, and a mysterious cloud just formed, and you could see lights moving around in it. And then an amazing rainstorm ensued. And it sort of washed out. Everyone went home because most people don't want to be in the cold rain in England with a pouring rain. But it was Colin Andrews had left at that time, and he said if you went to the perimeter exactly on the edge of this 1,800-acre farm, it was dry as a shuck. And so it was a strange sort of weather event, and there was a phenomenon in the cloud that we could see an object moving around that somehow was forming this rainstorm. So we had to get in our cars, and in England, where it's on the wrong side or the right side of the car, called the wrong side. Sorry, Americans are. And you were sitting there, and it was foggy and rainy and this and that. But everyone but 4 people had left, and so I was with a person on my team in my car, and then behind us was Chris and another woman in that car, and we were just sort of meditating, and we were playing the tones, we're doing it in this rain, and then it kind of stopped. And at a certain point, we're there, and on my window to the right, because you're on that side of the car in England, Chris started banging on my window. I put the window down, and he said, "There's a ET craft in the field lit up like a bloody Christmas tree," is a quote unquote. And I thought he was joking. He was sort of a jokester, and I say, yeah. What? So what? He said no, and he stepped aside, and there it was. It was this big 100-foot diameter disc, just a little above the wheat. It was maybe 10 feet above the wheat, and a few hundred feet by sort of the Avon River were there. It went through the farm, the River Avon. And so I said, oh, great. So, I get up and we signal to it, and it starts coming over. So I'm inviting it to come over, right? It's the whole point. But it turned out some of the people there were not so thrilled about this. And the woman who was in my car, who will remain nameless, was a PhD psychologist, and I later learned had done a lot of work with the UFO subculture on abductions. So her fear kicked in, and she said, "Stop." I said, "Why? This is why we're here." And she said, "Well, I didn't think anything like this would happen. I thought we'd see something way out there, a light in the sky." And I said, "Well, for God's sakes, this is the whole point of being here." But her fear, and then one other person's fear, was so great. And it did have a lot of strange effects. So, these craft, the ET craft that operate that way, they're seamless. But boy, they put out gigawatts of electricity. I'm thinking literally like enormous amounts. So we had effects happen where there were buzzing and electrical effects on the wires, on the electrical wires that were nearby. And we had piloerection, and that sounds very titillating. It's a medical term for when your hair stands on end. It's called piloerection anyway. So, right, doctors? So anyway, so this happened, and at that point, I thought, oh, awesome. And my hair didn't go full on standing on end like in '73 because it was still maybe, I would estimate, less than 100 yards, maybe 50 yards away. but very low. I mean, it was we were on a little rise, so it was right at eye level. It was a very large craft. But when the ET sensed the fear of this couple of people, one in particular, it literally backed off out of compassion. They're very sensitive to this. So I tell people, you know you're encountering an ET craft that if you're unnerved, it stops, it backs off. Whereas if it's an ARV loaded with fake aliens, it's going to come at you and you're going to get drugged out and dragged and tortured. So I always tell people, how do you know the difference? I say, oh, trust me, you're going to know the difference. Absolutely. So as a result, it went off and then it kind of went into the fog and went up in the clouds. They were very low hanging clouds. And I said, okay, well, I could still see in my remote view when I was standing there that it was still around. I could feel it and see it mentally. So at a certain point, it opened up this very circular opening in the sky. And it came over, but it was several thousand feet away. And we signaled and it signaled. And they were comfortable with that because it was at some distance. And then it vanished. That's how that whole episode ended, by the way. So, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of events like this. We have a couple books about it. One is called Extraterrestrial Contact Countdown to Transformation. And it recounts a number of these, of several hundred of these sort of events. But in the archive, so much of that will be in here. And the reason it's important is that these are experiments from the point of view of we're dealing with 20th century, early 20th century humans, just learning the science of consciousness and the interstellar sciences that attach to it. And so you're going to have these sort of things happen that are a little bit, unexpected, and people may or may not be ready for what's going to happen. And documenting it's very important because they're all, it's a teachable moment, you would say. When an event happens, how it was initiated, how it ended, why it ended, what associated phenomena were going on at the same time. And there's a lot. I mean, we've had events where objects that we have literally dematerialize in front of people and then rematerialize on the table. Things like this. It's very strange things where the ETs are letting you know we're here. Now, part of this, and I want to get into this for a moment before we move on, and that is the evolution of this has in some large part changed, not what we're doing, but the phenomenon itself, based on the technology curve of covert programs who obviously know what we're doing, can monitor what we're doing non-locally with their technologies, not a radio frequency, and from space, and increasingly can create a specter of threat to the ETs. So what I've observed over the 34 years I've been doing far into 3D they come. And so whereas that object was there for several minutes, and by the way, unfortunately, all the people that we had brought to have cameras went home because it rained. So we're sitting there, and, very frustrating. I needed these guys there back then, 30 some years ago, who are great with these new cameras. We didn't have good digital cameras then either. We didn't have nice, because we didn't have anything. I doubt it would have been very visible with a, Kodak Instamatic or Polaroid or whatever we had. But my aptitude is click. Luckily, with these new iPhones, the cameras on those are pretty good. So, put your settings right. At nighttime, you can see everything. But what has happened is that because these targeting capabilities have gone up and anywhere near the Earth, it's never mind right in front of you, the ETs have appeared more and more enigmatically. with stranger and stranger phenomena. And this makes total sense. And I can actually document how that's changed over the last 34 years. Because that's a long time. I mean, 34 years is almost half the whole period of the secrecy. And that's why I tell people we always communicate and send the message that please appear in any way that is safe and appropriate for this time, this place, this group, because we don't want anyone on our teams injured, and we don't want them, more importantly, as our invited guests, injured. So that is the main thing of the protocol, and the rate limit on there is what the ETs can do, and this is why sometimes some of the most amazing things we see now are in a fraction of a second. So I didn't see in here that any of the photos or videos in the category 1, so I don't know if we have those ready. But if we go through a few of these, and you've all seen, oh, they are in here. So in 2011, we were there and doing this, and oh my God, what happened? What was that? Was that just something fell on the computer? Okay, all right. So this is a fisheye, or a wide lens, and you can see the stars. These are the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. These are some members of our team, and we're doing our protocols. And this object comes up from the ground, comes up and stops. And if you have the one that zooms in on it, it's very interesting. This was seen. I saw it with the naked eye right in front of me, and so this is almost like people call a light ship. Well, it's not quite 3D materialized, so it wouldn't be picked up on radar. It happened very quickly, and then it vanished. But they were letting us know that they were there in the field. This was probably 20, 30 yards outside our circle. Boom. So people say, where's the evidence? Well, here it is. Next. Go to the next one. And this is my favorite one. But we were at Boca Grande on the West Coast. It's kind of pixelated because it's a poor quality screen. But this is a very unusual event. So we're going out to set up, and it's dark. And what happened is that we're looking right in front of us, and all of a sudden this area starts scintillating. And someone with me had a camera, and I said, take a picture right here. And this is an unretouched photo, and it looks like this looks like a toroid, like a donut energy. This is actually the energy field that manifested this being. And there are two eyes dim lit, and the torso, and then the lower body. But this is a very, almost like a crystalline being. So I just call this the light being, and it's extraterrestrial. And my understanding from them is that they're from a civilization that's been around observing Earth since the beginning of life on Earth, about 1 billion years. And it's very abstract. This is my favorite picture of all time, actually, because it actually captures the highest level of extraterrestrial civilizations that are observing and have been, in a sense, let's call them the guardians of life on Earth for hundreds of millions of years. Yeah. Next. And then this one is the, you probably, if you saw the movie, it's a very important photograph. Now, there's an older gentleman here. You can just see him. Oh, where's my thing? Right here. Yeah, chopsticks are useful. I don't know how to use them. Don't give me a chopstick, food will be everywhere. Klutz. So this is sort of a beak, like a feature, and the mouth. This is the head. Not all of it is visible. It was more lit from this side, and this is sort of like a feathery tunic, a hand, and the rest of the body, almost like a skirt. So this, but look at the size of the head. These are the eye sockets right here and here. Now this is a nighttime event, and I want to give a little background on it. A man named David Marconi, there's eye sockets and the nose, beak, and what have you. And this isn't the actual photo. There's nothing been photoshopped or anything about it. What's interesting about this whole experience, you can see the man to the right of the ET. I'm here. I'm sitting right here. There's one other person between me and the extraterrestrial. And the way this evolved is that we were in circle doing the meditation and doing the CE5 protocols. And all of a sudden, we hear, those of us on that part of the circle hear footsteps behind us. I mean, it's palpable. And I knew it was an ET. Looked, I couldn't see anything. So it was almost like the ET that touched me on my right shoulder. When I first saw it, it looked like this animal with the deer-like eyes, but it was an ET. But by the time it came close to me, because since I was kind of anxious about this as an 18-year-old guy, it came over and it touched my right shoulder. And even though that was palpable, my visual capability, I didn't see it at all, but I could sense it and feel it. So in this case, several people, not just one, heard these footsteps, and I went. So there was a man, he's the screenwriter who wrote Enemy of the State about the National Security Agency and a lot, named David Marconi. And he had a very good Nikon camera with the correct settings for nighttime. And I said, David, take a picture over this way. And when he did so, at about that instant, there was a ruby red sphere that appeared between the guy beside me and this gentleman that you see in the background, that I'd say probably anyone looking directly there saw it. It was 3D, but it wasn't this. It was just, it looked like a teardrop, sort of ruby red, like an LED light, honestly, but just suspended in the air. At that instant, he hit his remote, the camera took a picture. This is what you get. So interestingly, the new digital cameras, because of their CCD, their light cells, they pick up much more information than the human eye can see. So what we're trying to do is develop more protocols where when the ETs cannot just be full on 3D flesh and blood for very long, they can appear this way and all kinds of events will happen. Well, the follow-on story of this, and the reason we call this particular ET the healer, and it has a very almost like triangular head, almost like a praying mantis sort of head, is that this particular ET has appeared in our groups other times, and it's resulted in some rather extraordinary healings, which we don't have time to go into all this. But this particular one, the man there you see had lost his hearing, severe hearing impairment when he was a teenager. And he had to wear hearing aids, and even then he could barely hear. And so after we kind of broke up that night, it turns out this being stayed around the contact site, and this older gentleman stayed out and saw it. It would appear, it'd be this ruby red, and he was communicating with it. And towards the end of the evening, he just very innocently and parenthetically said, is there anything you can do to fix my hearing? Because even with my hearing aids, I can't really hear too much. And he went to bed, got up the next morning, had perfect hearing, and has ever since. So this 50-year long or whatever it was hearing loss was fixed by this extraterrestrial being. So those sort of experiences have happened many, many times. We call them CE5 contact healings. And it does happen, not every day. And we got some time. Yo, bro, how about this ankle? But anyway, irreverent, inappropriate, actually. Breach of protocol. But that is how this event took place. So when I say that there have been thousands of these CE5 contact events, I am not exaggerating. Now, we always don't have the luck or someone with the skill to get the documentation, but we have a great deal. And you'll see that in the archive. We're going to keep populating this as we go through our old files and find pictures and videos. We'll put them in there. Next. This is, of course, a very important event that took place in Joshua Tree in 2017. Now, that date you'll notice is the date when No, is that the right date? No, it was '09, I thought. Who labeled this? No, it's not 2017. It's the wrong date. That's an error. I think it was November, but not 9. So in '09, this was right after President Obama was elected, interestingly, just right after. And we were in Joshua Tree National Park, in the very center of the park. It's an 800,000 acre park. And we're doing the protocols. And there were a number of, quick sightings that were going on. Sometimes you'll just have an object light up for a fraction of a second and go off and things like this. But we take a break after a couple hours, and we were on break, and I walked to the east from our contact site with a couple of people, maybe 3 or 4 people, I can't remember. And when we were down there, there was, it's at a certain point, right on beside my right shoulder, right here, was about a grapefruit size golden white sphere that appeared and walked with me. And I saw it, the other people saw it, and I said, oh, they're here. So I said, everyone, let's get back in the circle and know that this event has happened. Next picture, there are much, this is not a good picture. Whatever that picture should be taken out. It's got all kinds of artifacts in it. So what happened, just very quickly, there is this sphere orb. This is not a, when we got back to the circle, we heard right in this area behind, these are the chairs with people's blankets on it because it was chilly up at 5,000 feet in the desert. And then you see this in the background. Now this is an inexpensive camera. Raven, the Bullseye, took this picture, but it was taken, we had heard a group of 4 or 5 ETs talking. So you could actually hear them converse. And she just held her breath. She didn't have a tripod and did a couple-second exposure. And what came out was this orb, and it was like a cone of light that lit up this bush, the chairs, and in it was one of the ETs who's turning like this and waving because I was connecting. And that's this guy. So if you look carefully, you'll see he has, looks like spectacles, but they're dark, they're almost like night spectacles, a white teleportation device on the head. It looks like a yarmulke, but it's not. I'm sure, I don't think he's Jewish from, and then you have, the chest and the body, and this is one leg and foot. This is one arm, and this is the one saying hello. This looks very white because somehow that cone of trans-dimensional light lit up the tip of his nose quite a bit. There's a little mouth here. So the forehead has sort of a, was it the Klingons that have the indented, Worf has the indented, it has a concave area here on the top of the skull. Now the cranial vault would go from here to here, very large head. We estimate the being was pretty small, 3-4 feet, we don't know. Just behind these chairs. There's some other photos in here. Field system. And we're out in the middle of nowhere, and we have no other electronics on, and it starts communicating. So I would ask this being various questions, where are you from? You get the information from the Andromeda galaxy, and the detector would beep, beep, which is the signal for yes. And then would received his name, which is Bijou. And it would beep, beep. And then, I got the sense of the level of intelligence, and I sort of sense, I think the IQ was around 400. CE, who was at the Nevada test range doing a retrieval. He became aware of what we were doing, and it contacted me. And so he did a CE5 event. And in that event, he had an experience where this ET appeared to him, and he said, "My name is Bijou." And it was the same, it was a very playful, impish, a smaller being with no hair, and had some kind of device where he could write in light things. You read this whole account, it's fascinating. But so this military witness started doing CE5, and the ETs had this amazing event take place. So all of this is in the archive in various forms, and there's a much longer presentation of this that we have in our videotapes. I'm going to run out of time next. So this is interesting. The reason this is important is that often so you'll have all kinds of strange electromagnetic effects, and we had of which there are thousands we've documented, happen all the time. So frequently, we will have our magnetometers that pick up magnetic field shift really begin to get active. And what the ETs have learned to do is use it as a sort of digital electromagnetic communication system. So what happens is that we'll have the magnetometer that measures the delta, the change in the magnetic field, which actually should never change unless you take a magnetometer over to an electrical outlet or an electrical device. It should be quiet. Once you zero it for the magnetic field on the Earth where you are, because it's not like the magnetic field on the Earth is changing all the time, but it changes as you move across the Earth. But when you're stationary, it should be stable, and it is. And what they've learned to do, the ETs have used these magnetometers to then communicate in very specific tones that are not possible according to the manufacturer of the magnetometers. But it's a way that they're doing a type of trans-dimensional electronic communication. And so then what our task is to decipher what that interstellar Morse code is. And we have hours and hours and hours of these recordings. It's fascinating when this happens. Same thing happens with other electronic devices we have. So just to sort of summarize this, there are all kinds of phenomena that happen. Physical ETs in the field, craft overhead, electromagnetic communications through devices, et cetera, and so on, that have happened thousands and thousands of times. Now, people have asked me, how often does this happen when you go out for a week? I say, every night, every week we've ever gone out. There has never been an expedition where we haven't had contact, not once, not since 1991, when we had our first one, when we went to Belgium. So what I think people should understand is that ultimately, the ultimate, you know, open sourcing of disclosure and contact is for people to do this themselves. Sans Dr. Greer, you know, without me there, because I am an objective liability for a team, because there's no way I'm going to be there in any stealth way at all, right? It's going to be fully known, and the security I have to, all this nonsense. So it's much better if people out there do it on their own and learn it and master it. And I think the results are much better when I'm not around now, not at the beginning. So I think I'm actually become a liability to going out with folks in many ways. And for that reason, I think that people need to pick up the baton and carry it forward. Since I'm not as free as I was in the early days, I've lost my freedom for this kind of contact. Not on the, you know, every level, but certainly on a manifest level where it's some 3D object. Is there another one in here? Oh, okay, yeah. I have no idea how many she put in. Oh, this is fun. So you heard the story about being it with Admiral Morin and the French. And this is me pointing at this thing. So everyone's craning around. So we're there setting up, it's still daytime. It's a huge group, there's like 60 some people. And the cover story, it was a CE5 weekend expedition training, but it was really so that the Ministry of Defense of France could have people there to see what we do and learn how we did it. But there was a whoosh very quickly of a very large, the camera didn't catch this, a very large multicolored, almost like a rainbow energy field that came right behind the group and stopped. And what the camera picked up wasn't what I saw, but it picked up this strange kind of purpley colored field hovering a little bit, and it was going over to where we had set up our puja table, which is a Sanskrit ceremony that's all in Sanskrit that we do before we do our meditation. And they always come, by the way, for that meditation and the puja. And so this photograph was this sort of strangely partially in this dimension disc that was there as sort of an energy field, and that's all the camera caught. It turned out they were there the whole time that night, and as it got dark, we had an event happen where the energy from this object went up and down the row of cars. So we had like 30 cars parked in part of the field in this 2,200 acre estate that had been sealed off for the CE5 event. And it was almost like something you would see in a science fiction movie where the lights of the cars went up the chain of the cars and off and back like this. And then we heard some ETs walking. Again, just like we had with an oracle with the healer. Of course, this is 2010. This is 14 years ago now, and almost 14 years ago. And by then it's pitch dark, and we could see from my left where I was sitting, there were 4 kind of luminous ETs in the field. And so I pointed this out. Unfortunately, you had about 30 primates stampede into the hayfield, and it scared them off. They ran. You could see where they ran, and then they just dematerialized. So I said, look, we have to be calm and don't do this. This is one of the problems with crowds, is that they don't follow instructions. They get excited, and the human tendency to get disorderly when they get excited. So but I said, let's calm down, go over there, and then invite them to come around. So what happened, people who had very good subtle perceptual abilities, because they were good meditators or knew what to look for, we saw these 4 beings come over, and we had our, so I brought out my compass, and it started beating with a certain pattern. And then it synced up with my heart rate and the ET's heart rate. And everyone gathered around. You could see this thing go boom, 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 boom. The compass is magnetic. And the magic with these trans-dimensional systems is the magnetic aspect of the electromagnetic spectrum. I said this earlier. So there are a number of things that happened on this weekend. It was phenomenal, what everyone experienced. And this is also then the late at night, they had set up radar over the area, and we got the report from Philippe Aubin from the Minister of Defense that they tracked objects going overhead and making turns at 200,000 kilometers per hour, which would be about 125,000 miles per hour. Yeah, 0.62 times. Yep. So next. This is probably, well, let's do the one that's, well, we can do either one. Anyway, go back. There's one that is out where you see the whole thing. Do we have that picture? Okay, that's all right. It's in the archive and most of you have seen it. So we're meditating and there's a camera set up and there's there's a ET being, but it's in an energy form and it goes in one frame, zips through the center of the group and wraps around. There was a medical doctor, I think from Peru, if I remember right, or it was Chile, South America, and next frame. And it goes around, it comes through this left shoulder and goes right here, almost like in her forehead and head. It almost looks like a spermatozoa. So I sometimes call it the cosmic spermatozoa. But it's actually an energy field. And she, at that moment, was having a full-on higher consciousness samadhi experience. But it got captured. This whole contact event got captured on film. Next. Oh yeah, this is way fun. So our logo that you've seen exists for a reason. There's the tones. And we're out there. This was the same year as the craft landed. So this is from an airplane we went up when. Someone put a label, it blocked it foolishly. But anyway, it was these three circles connected by lines. And it was perfect. So the way this happened is that on this particular night where this formed, you can hear our tones. It's really cool to go out at night with us doing this. Isn't it fun? This is way fun. This is what I really love doing. You know, I'd rather be doing this than brief a member of Congress any day of the week. But what's fascinating about it is that that shape, if we have a picture of it, just a frozen, is that we had gone that night up on Woodbury Hill. It was a different night from the landing event. And we said, you know, we wonder if we can communicate with the ETs and with nobody knowing what we're doing, there are only 12 of us, and go into meditation and send a shape that they could then make a crop circle in. And of course, many of these crop circles are hoax and whatnot, about 80%, honestly. But there are some real ones. This was the most certified, scientifically studied one, but the results of it were taken out of the study that was done by covert operatives. It said, do not report the results of this one. That's true. I mean, the cover up within the UFO subculture is another whole module, but I'm not going to go into it. But so we freeze it. So what we did, we were debating what shape. So I came up with this concept of the first shape that encloses space, right? You know what I mean? 3. So, you know, you get a line from 2 points. You know, a single point is, you know, the first. You get a line, but to get enclosed space, the first basic universal form that encloses space is a triangle. So, which is important in a lot of, for a lot of reasons we don't have time to go into. So I said, well, why don't we just create, all of us visualize a perfect equilateral triangle consisting of 3 circles connected by lines. And so we did. And, you know, we did it just at the beginning of the evening when we were doing our CE5 meditation protocol. And then in the wee hours of the morning, which was a few hours later, because the sun comes up very early in England in July, right? And it doesn't get dark until quite late because you're very far north in the latitudes. And so uh, we were contacted because there was a farmer who went out to work in his fields, sort of pretty much before dawn with the lights on, and he was cutting this field, and he saw this, and it got reported, and it got back to us immediately, and it was right below Oliver's Castle, which is an outcropping, a cliff in Wiltshire, that area that's right above. But it's pretty much in line sight of from where we were. Now, no one on planet Earth knew that we had transmitted mentally to the ETs this shape. Certainly the farmer didn't and the other people. So we went there, saw it. We first climbed up to the top of and went out to the edge of the cliffs or hill at Oliver's Castle and looked down. It was like it had been plucked out of our minds and put right in the field. It was unbelievable. So we said, they heard us. And then we got a little airplane, went around, took some pictures or video. Not very good quality, but don't blame me. I can't do everything. But I think I'm not a very good person with cameras. And you can see these are a cluster of people in it, how big it was. And when it got tested, they found that there were all these electromagnetic cellular anomalies where the crop wasn't pushed down or broken, it was pulled down. So it's like, if you know what electrogravitic is, it's lifter, but you can reverse that force field where it increases gravity. And this is how the real crop circles are formed. It creates you kind of create a blueprint energetically, and then technologically you put it over a field, and it very quickly forms exactly that shape by pulling the crop down instead of smushing it down. So the hoax ones are obviously stomped. This was not stomped. And when they did the cellular analysis, they found that that was the case, and the cell walls were expanded. There was a clear electromagnetic effect that they could show microscopically. So that event was how we ended up with our logo. So you see that triangle. This is how we adopted. We call it the CSETI triangle, of course, from the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. But it's just a little nice little bit of history of how that logo came to be that you see on our materials. Next. This is way fun. Light, it'd be better if the light's off. So this is a night vision. That's a craft. Look what it does. Okay, wait. There's a plane in the distance. Look what comes in. See this? So it comes in, circles that other area, goes like boom. So, we see these every single night we're out. It's just this particular person had a camera that captured it. Here it comes. Yeah. Goes in, turns. This is not an airplane. It went around one that looked like an aircraft. Next. So this event, what is a whole chapter of the book called The Orion Transmissions. Now, this is a strange event that happened at Joshua Tree again, a different year. I believe I didn't see the year. 2008 is when this happened. So you hear me talking. There were eventually several objects up around Orion that would light up and signal to us and light up and signal to us. And at that moment, we had a radar detector. We're in the middle of an 800,000, and it starts doing this sequence. It does it for 23 minutes. And it ends up, it's a very specific sequence that we recorded, and then we basically translate it in the last chapter of the book. if you have read that book. There, see, boom. So what are these things? We call them flash bulbs. We'll be out there and there'll be an object that just lights up for an instant, sometimes so bright it'll light up the whole circle, other times it's very faint, and it's stationary. And at one point, we had 12 of them simultaneously up around this area that were going on and off and moving around. So anyway, we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these sort of things. So these are just example of the different kind of phenomenon that happen when we're out under the stars doing the CE5 protocols. So we can turn that off, but because this goes on for a long time. The idea here is you have to have preparation for all the bizarre ways that this happens. Everyone's expecting, a movie from Hollywood and the ship lands and you get out and shake hands. There have been events like that with the healers right there beside this man, the photograph is an unretouched real photograph. But most of the time, it's all kinds of almost abstract communication events that happen. Now, it can happen in consciousness where you get messages. It can happen through the electronic devices. So you should have some of these electronic devices, and that's in the CE5 contact app, what you should have, how to get them. You should have, if you can, very good cameras and also night vision binoculars. The other phenomenon that happens quite frequently is where we're doing this and you hear either the ETs talking or walking. But usually with the naked eye, you're not going to see anything. Because if they were visual 3D, then they'd be likely to be struck or hit by a directional energy weapon. So as we've gone through, I started out this segment with this, more and more evolution in technology where ETs can be targeted, it has resulted in them doing different phenomena that's more and more subtle, right? Now, I think that will change if we can get these illegal operations stood down, there will be the potential for much, much, much more contact that will be expressed. Ultimately, this is sort of an experimental program that's setting up, let's call it the morphogenic field, if you want to look that up, but the sort of or the 1% effect, where enough people do this and it builds and potentiates contact, but it also changes how people look at this. When you go out and you experience it, it is life-changing, even if it's for a night or two. I know in Demi Lovato, and we were there, and there was this beautiful cobalt blue ship right above us that you probably have seen the photo of that. I mean, it just absolutely blew their minds. And that was just, not a very well structured, it was just sort of a gathering, but you never forget this. So I think people should be doing this in their own small groups. So the idea is that you don't need to be with 20, 30, 50, or 100 people, although it is very exciting when you're in a big group and it happens. And that's why we're going to be doing about 500 people in Temecula, California at the end of July. You guys should all come if you want to. It's going to be an amazing event at this vineyard out in the countryside, and we'll be outside every night, which is wonderful. That's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I think that when you come to these as a large group, the beauty of it is that there is a mass consciousness effect that takes place. Then even the large things we've done with hundreds or 1,000 or more people, there have been sightings and events happen. But mainly it's a teaching experience for people to understand how it happens. So what we'll be doing is that during the day, we'll be doing the teaching and sharing unpacking all this. There'll be sessions in the mornings for how to operate cameras, how to form a group. We'll have Lori Williams do a whole module on techniques for remote viewing. And then the afternoons, I'll be presenting information. And then every night, well, not the first night, because it's the first night people get there, but Saturday and Sunday night, we'll be out under the stars. Everybody. It'll be great fun if you guys want to come. So do we have any questions about Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind? This is just sort of an introductory look at it. And before we move on, if there's someone online who wants a question, yep.
Asked about different levels of consciousness and where humans fit in.
Well, no, I mean, there's basically, if you study this, there's the waking state, normal waking state, which we're all right now. There's dreaming and sleeping. And then there's cosmic consciousness, God consciousness, unity consciousness. There are a couple above that, or some have termed it Brahman consciousness. It's from, the Vedas, but in reality, what that means is that when you go beyond unity consciousness, you're actually experiencing as an individual the state of unity consciousness, but also experiencing the entirety of the cosmos as yourself. That's what I experienced. I actually experienced Brahman consciousness when I died. It was very beautiful. But the ordinary states of consciousness, before you get into these increasingly evolved and higher states, are waking, dreaming, and sleeping, which we all experience every day. So, as a collective community, humans are, except for, occasionally in the ordinary waking state, they're not experiencing the unbounded field consciousness unless they're meditating and developing that capability, which not a lot of people do. But if you pursue that, you then to go through and evolve into these higher states. Now, it takes some time, and if you're going to do it naturally, which is the only way you should be doing it, I would not do anything that's a chemical to induce that state. It actually damages brain cells and sets you way back. I know it's not popular for me to say that, but it's a scientific fact. Don't do it. You certainly cannot come to a CE5 event and do it. But the ETs know that we're at this stage, but they also know the potential we have. Let's talk for a moment about human potential. Humans, because we're conscious and awake, have every capability of the highest civilizations in the cosmos. We absolutely do. And we're not inferior innately or superior to them. It's just that what's been actualized, what has been realized. And so we have not developed that. Now, there are certain communities, and in history, you hear of ancient societies such as the Shambhala kingdom, et cetera, and so on, that's in mythology, which I actually think literally existed, where for brief periods of time there'd be a high enlightenment in a group. But as a entire planet, we haven't evolved there, but we will. And what I have been told and seen over the next 500,000 years that has been shown, that I've seen in my own experiences, is that once we reach this point of universal peace, right? It's too late for world peace, but where we've established peace on earth and peace in space, right? That's like a universal peace. Then there'll be a very rapid evolution in states of consciousness, because with these technologies, once they're not withheld, you will eliminate poverty globally very quickly. There will be abundance, so that the whole economic system, there's not an economy of scarcity. It's a economy that's not an economy in the normal sense at all, but where there's complete abundance for anyone who needs it. Now, that won't happen right away, but over some decades or a century or two. And once that foundation is laid, as I mentioned, then people will turn to more creative pursuits, because the average work week and whatnot will drop to 10 or 15 hours a week. There'll be enormous amounts of abundance. And then people going, now what? Well, right now, most people spend 90% of their time on TikTok or watching kitty cats play pianos on YouTube, or whatever brain dead pursuits humans engage in. But I mean, brain dead, right? One notch this side of the zombie apocalypse right now. But sorry. Actually, not sorry, it's a fact. So, but once we get over that, then people would turn to, well, now what? Well, the now what is the almost boundless trajectory out, where the development of higher states of consciousness brings with it the application of higher and higher technologies that are linked to consciousness, and we will be interstellar. We will become an interstellar civilization. And that's why, if you take the account of that landing of the pyramid-shaped craft at Rendlesham Forest and Bentwaters Air Force Base, the message of that luminous being that said, we are your descendants from 500,000 years in the future, which is at the end of this new cycle opening. We're closing out about a 450,000 year cycle evolutionary on Earth, and we're opening up a 500,000 year cycle. So you're talking about a 1,000,000 year period, right, in terms of past and what's coming. And we're at that transition, which is why it's so chaotic, which makes sense. And this gets me to this whole concept that we mentioned briefly in the film Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and the studies that have been done in quantum physics on what's called superfluidity. And in superfluidity in physics, you can take a container of helium and cool it down to absolute zero. And what they've found consistently in these quantum studies is that it's a very gradual process, and then suddenly the helium atoms or molecules, same thing in this case, begin to coherently align. You can look this up. And once about 1%, only 1% of the atoms of helium in the container become coherent, you reach mass coherence, and in an instant, it flips to a superfluid state. But just before that happens, the whole container becomes very boiling, chaotic, crazy. Pretty much sounds like Earth right now in 2024, or for the last 100 years. If you look at a 1,000,000 year period, looking at this from a big perspective, a large perspective over 1,000,000 years of history. And so, but then in that instant afterwards, after all the chaos, field coherence in the entire population. So in a similar way, looking at humans, each of us is an atom of helium. If 1% of us could be really properly coherent and aligned, it would then transform very quickly the other 99% of humanity because of this non-local effect and the power of consciousness. Because consciousness is not linear, it is non-local, and it has this potentiating effect in the coherence of the whole population. In the quantum physics experiment with superfluidity and helium, you're talking about, a population of helium atoms or molecules. Now, I'm now talking about the population of humans on the planet. And we're not there yet, but I have great faith that we will. And frankly, and I want to say this very clearly, the only possible future for humanity is universal peace. So think about it. If we don't have universal peace, meaning peace here and in space, the technologies that have entered into this planet and been developed since the nuclear era, never mind the reverse engineering of extraterrestrial and other technologies, the application of that in the consciousness of division and disunity is an extinction of humanity, period. So this is not just a philosophical issue, it's an existential crisis. And therefore, a lot of people would like to say, well, let's unite the world or against a common alien threat. We'll have world unity. But that's world unity at the point of extinction, because if the world engages in conflict with civilizations that are hundreds of thousands to millions of years more advanced than we are, and we continue to be a threat in space and a threat in distant planets due to the non-local nature of the cosmos and the nature of these quantum weapons, let's call them, there is no future. There's no humanity, and there could be possibly no Earth. So this is why for 30 some years I've said there's only one possible outcome that we can survive. And people may think this is just a philosophical point. It's not. It's a very practical point that we cannot go forward, not only in terms of conscious evolution, but even a physical material civilization unless we figure out how to live together peacefully amongst each other and with other life in the universe. That hasn't happened. It has to happen. It's the biggest challenge. And this is why the future of humanity and the future of Earth is very much contingent on the evolution of consciousness and people acknowledging that we have to get beyond just division. So, having endless diversity is beautiful. It's like a beautiful garden that has a million different flowers and colors and everything else. But if you don't see that the life force, the sap and the life force running through all those plants is the same, what if all the flowers started killing each other, right? Well, that's what humans do. So we have to get to a state of perception and experience that's in this deeper level of spiritual consciousness where we all see all life, ours and extraterrestrial, as part of this large cosmic family and fabric. And once we get to that point, I assure you, the extraterrestrial civilizations in the cosmos will open their arms very wide to us. And until then, we're in a quarantine, right? It's sort of a cosmic quarantine. And so this is a big crisis, and nobody wants to talk about it like this because everyone gets into policy speak and material thoughts. But that's fine. I mean, I'm a doctor and a scientist, but that's not enough. We also have to have, and what did George H.W. Bush say? I don't have the vision thing. Well, we need to have the vision thing. We need to develop a vision that has to guide the world across this chasm technologically, where we're facing extinction level events all around us, not only war and technology, but the biosphere and on and on and on. We're in a multi-system crisis. And I like to tell people, as an emergency doctor, I know an organic system emergency when I see one. And I can assure you that the Earth is in an absolute emergency. Now, the good news is it can be healed, but it's not going to just be healed by material disclosure. It has to have a conscious and vision and spiritual component that goes with it. And again, I want to emphasize, I'm not talking about religious solutions, because I don't care what religion, I've studied all of them. They end up being an excuse for people to kill each other. If you doubt it, I lived in the Middle East for 3 years. So if you doubt what I just said, go visit. If you got the stomach to do so. And I think this is why we have to begin to view ourselves as universal beings, that the one universe, and there's one being in a sense. The conscious field is a singularity, and all of us are awake. So in that sense, we're children of God, of the Great Spirit, as Native people would say. But unless we acknowledge that and act like that's the case, it's not going to be a survivable outcome, because all that will happen is that we'll find more and more reasons to hate each other and more powerful weapons to destroy the planet. And the most dangerous ones, unfortunately, are not even known by people in the Congress, the President, or the United Nations. They have no idea what kind of technologies have been developed as a consequence of 80 years of studying extraterrestrial sciences and energy and propulsion systems and applying those to weapon systems. So that is the biggest threat. It's a much bigger threat than the nuclear threat, and it's a much bigger danger than anything else that's being talked about in politics, international relations, or the United Nations, or anywhere else. And until it gets squarely put on the agenda, it's not going to be dealt with properly. And I think this is what our task for the Disclosure Project is to put all these issues together in an understandable way, so people begin to realize this is of critical importance that it be dealt with. But there's also something that has to be done also. What do we do if there is disclosure? The next step has to be a contact protocol from all the people of the world to contact these civilizations peacefully and scientifically and diplomatically within the understanding of the universality of conscious life. And that's the only way that can occur. It can't happen because we only want to identify with the ones that look more like Homo sapiens than others. That's just interstellar racism and division. So we know that this has to be dealt with. And the good news, and what gives me great hope, and I'll end on this note because it's a beautiful account. Back in about I think it was around 1978, I had amazing lucid dreams. So those of you who know me personally, I know most things through meditative and lucid dream in particular states. And it seems to be, I was talking to someone at the CIA, apparently Cherokee and certain Native American people have some kind of lucid dreaming capability like the Aboriginals in Australia with the dream time, where they will see in a dream and then it'll happen or they will act on it and be guided by it. So I met my wife in a dream before I met her physically. Most important things in my life I've seen in a lucid dream. So this particular night, I was up I went into this state of consciousness and I was in the future. And it's sort of around the time of now, the next few years, in terms of how things looked. Now, this is almost 50 years ago when I had this happen. I was a fairly young guy. I guess I was I was probably about 22 when this happened. And I was out in a desert area, in the desert Southwest. It looked a lot like White Sands, ironically, where we detonated, Alamogordo and all that. And the entire United States government and others around the world were supporting an initiative to make open contact with these civilizations, or one of the senior representatives of these civilizations. And the military were there protecting the event instead of shooting them down. They had been transformed, and the rogue elements in the military had been stood down because they were nowhere around doing this. And so it was a beautiful, crystal clear day. And in a blue, blue sky, there was this seamless, not very large, I would say probably 20, 30 feet size, like an egg-shaped craft. And it descended and hovered, and looked very elderly, but a very senior, older ET emerged. And there were cameras, and this whole peaceful contact was the whole world watching, right? The whole world's watching. And it was crystal clear. So my hope is that if this can be handled properly, the military and the technologies they have will be deployed not to shoot these objects down, but to protect in early initiatives to have peaceful contact. See, same tool, how is it used? So I've actually spoken about this with some senior military people, and it's a beautiful vision of how the military could step into another whole purpose, because they're a very disciplined organization. They have amazing technology. Many, many brilliant people are in those systems, and they could be very useful to protect the sacred obligation for us to reach out as a species to these other planetary societies. And that's what I saw. And so let's keep that as a thought. Well, it's a little after 10, so we're going to call it a wrap on this particular effort and presentation week. I really appreciate all of you coming, and those of you who want to hang around tonight, you're welcome to do so later. I know most of you are leaving. We have early mornings, but for those of you online, thank you for your attention and for supporting what we're doing. I hope it's been informative and interesting for you all. God bless you all.